At 2 a.m., my phone rang, jolting me from a restless sleep. I saw Rachel's name on the screen and knew, before I even answered, that something was terribly wrong. Her voice was barely more than a whisper, trembling with fear and heartbreak. "Mom, can you come, please? I need you." There was no hesitation. I threw on my coat, grabbed my keys, and drove through the empty streets, my heart pounding with every mile. The world outside was silent, but inside my chest, a storm was raging. I didn't know what I would find, but I knew my daughter needed me. When I arrived, the house was eerily quiet. The porch light flickered, and Rachel stood in the doorway, her face streaked with tears. She fell into my arms, sobbing so hard she could barely speak. "He's gone, Mom. He just left. I don't know what to do." I held her close, whispering the same words I'd used when she was a child, promising her that I was here, that I would make it right. But nothing could have prepared me for what I saw when I stepped inside. The walls of their home, once filled with laughter and hope, were now covered in frantic, angry messages. Some were scrawled in marker, others scratched into the paint, all of them revealing a secret so dark, so twisted, that I could barely breathe. It was as if the truth had been hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to explode. Everyone in town thought I was just a harmless old widow, shuffling through the grocery store in my worn-out coat, smiling politely at neighbors who barely remembered my name. They saw me as fragile, lost in my grief, just waiting for life to pass me by. They didn't know about the years I spent building a business from nothing, about the nights I stayed up balancing ledgers and tracking down fraud, about the sacrifices I made to give Rachel a better life. They didn't know that beneath the quiet exterior was a woman who had survived heartbreak, betrayal and loss, and who would do anything to protect her family. Mark Evans. My son-in-law had always been charming, always quick with a compliment or a joke. People admired him, trusted him, believed every word he said. But I'd seen the way he looked at Rachel when he thought no one was watching, the way he dismissed my questions with a smile that never reached his eyes. I'd learned long ago that evil doesn't always come with a warning. Sometimes it hides behind a handsome face and a winning smile. As I stood in that ruined living room, holding my daughter and reading the confessions written on the walls, I made a silent promise. They thought I was too old, too simple, too weak to fight back. But they had no idea who I really was or what I was willing to do to protect what was mine. I would not let Rachel become another victim. I would not let Mark's secrets destroy our family. It all started when Rachel married Mark Evans. After my husband passed, the world seemed to shrink around me. The house that once echoed with laughter and late-night conversations became a place of quiet routines and gentle solitude. I filled my days with small comforts, tending the garden, reading the paper, volunteering at the library. Most people in town saw me as a gentle, aging widow, content to fade into the background. They didn't know about the years I spent as a forensic accountant, the late nights poring over spreadsheets, the battles I fought in boardrooms where I was the only woman at the table. They didn't know that I'd built a business from nothing, or that I'd quietly invested my savings so that Rachel would never have to worry. I never flaunted my success. After my husband's illness, I learned the value of privacy. I kept my name off the door, my wealth and trusts, and my skills behind a mask of simplicity. I wanted Rachel to grow up with a sense of normalcy, not the burden of other people's envy or expectations. I raised her to be kind, to work hard, and to trust her instincts. She was my pride and my joy, the reason I'd sacrificed so much. Rachel was always quick to see the good in people. She had her father's open heart and my stubborn streak. When she called one Sunday afternoon, her voice bubbling with excitement, I knew something was different. "Mom, I want you to meet someone," she said. "His name is Mark. He's special. I think you'll really like him." I smiled, listening to her describe him, his quick wit, his ambition, the way he made her laugh. I wanted to be happy for her, but a mother's intuition is a powerful thing. There was a note of nervousness in her voice, a hesitation she tried to hide. I told her to bring him for dinner, to let me see for myself. Mark arrived with flowers and a dazzling smile. He was handsome, in a polished, practiced way, and he greeted me with a warmth that felt just a little too rehearsed. He spoke about his work, his plans, his dreams for the future. Rachel glowed beside him, her eyes shining with hope. But I watched the way he looked at her, the way he dismissed my questions with a charming laugh, the way he steered the conversation back to himself. Then came his mother, Linda. She swept in with a cloud of expensive perfume and a smile that never reached her eyes. She complimented my quaint home, then immediately suggested a new color for the living room walls. She corrected my pronunciation of her last name, and when Rachel wasn't looking, she gave me a look that was pure calculation. At dinner, she rearranged the silverware, made subtle comments about modernizing the place, and dropped the names of people she thought I should know. I'd seen this before. People who thought they could size me up in a glance, who mistook kindness for weakness, who believed age was the same as ignorance. Years ago, I might have confronted them head-on, but I'd learned the value of patience. I'd learned that people reveal themselves when they think no one is watching. This time, I decided to let them believe what they wanted. If they saw me as a helpless widow, so be it. I would play the part, watch, and wait for their true intentions to surface. I would protect Rachel, not by shielding her from the world, but by letting her see it clearly. I would gather evidence, document every slight, and prepare for the moment when the truth would matter most. I walked into the Evans home in my plainest dress, ready to play my role perfectly. Dinner at the Evans home was meant to be a celebration, but from the moment I stepped through the door, I felt the temperature in the room drop. Rachel greeted me with a hug, her excitement barely contained, but Mark's smile was all surface, polished, practiced, and just a little too wide. He took my coat and hung it with exaggerated care, glancing at my plain dress and sensible shoes as if he were cataloging every detail for later discussion. "You look comfortable, Helen," he said, his tone just shy of patronizing. "We like to keep things casual here, too." Linda appeared from the kitchen, her perfume arriving a full second before she did. She wore a silk blouse and pearls, her hair perfectly coiffed, her lips pursed in a way that made me feel as if I'd already failed some unspoken test. "Helen, so glad you could join us," she said, her eyes flicking over my outfit, the casserole dish in my hands, the way I stood just inside the doorway. "Rachel tells me you're quite the cook. I hope you don't mind, but I've already set the table. I find it's best to keep things orderly." I smiled and thanked her, pretending not to notice the way she rearranged the silverware after I set it down. Rachel, oblivious to the undercurrents, chattered about her new job, her plans for the future, the little things that made her happy. Mark listened with a patient smile, but every so often he would interrupt to steer the conversation back to himself, his work, his friends, his latest accomplishment. "It's a lot to manage, but I'm used to handling complicated things," he said, glancing at me as if to make sure I understood. As we sat down to eat, Linda took her place at the head of the table, Mark at the other end, with Rachel and me in between. The meal began with polite conversation, but it didn't take long for the subtle jabs to start. Linda corrected me twice before the salad was finished, once for using the wrong fork, and once for passing the bread basket to the left instead of the right. "It's the little things that matter, Helen," she said, her tone gentle but patronizing. "We want Rachel to feel comfortable in every setting." Mark, meanwhile, took every opportunity to drop hints about his success. He mentioned the new car he'd just leased, the exclusive club he'd joined, and the important clients he was handling at work. "It's a lot of responsibility," he said, glancing at his mother for approval. "But I'm up for it. Some people just aren't cut out for the pressure, you know?" I nodded, asking naive questions. "What's it like working with so many important people? Do you ever get nervous in meetings?" Mark laughed, shaking his head. "Not really. I guess I was just born for it. Some people need a lot of hand-holding, but I like to take charge." Linda watched me closely, her lips pursed in that way I'd already come to recognize. She corrected me again when I poured the wine, then leaned over to Rachel and whispered, "Your mother is so sweet, but she's a little old-fashioned, isn't she? We'll have to help her adjust." Rachel just smiled, squeezing my hand under the table. "Mom's always been a little quirky, but that's what I love about her." She meant it as a compliment, but I could see the seeds of doubt being planted, watered by Linda's gentle suggestions and Mark's concerned questions. After dinner, as we lingered over coffee, Mark leaned in and said, "Don't worry, Helen. If you ever need help with your affairs, I'll explain the paperwork. It can be confusing at your age. He winked at Rachel, who giggled, thinking he was being charming. I thanked him, letting my voice tremble just a little. That's very kind. I do get overwhelmed sometimes. Linda smiled, satisfied, and turned the conversation to the upcoming charity gala, making sure to mention the guest list and the exclusive venue. It's important to keep up appearances, she said, glancing at my dress. You never know who you'll meet. Throughout the meal, I catalogued every slight, every backhanded compliment, every time Mark or Linda looked at me as if I were a child. I watched Mark preen, watched Rachel glow with pride, watched the Evanses congratulate themselves on their subtle dominance. Inside, I repeated my mantra. They had no idea. They had no idea who I was, what I'd built, or what I was capable of. They saw a woman past her prime, someone to be managed and pitied. They didn't see the strategist, the survivor, the silent force who'd helped build her own world. After dessert, as Rachel and Linda cleared the table, Mark leaned in and whispered to Rachel, "She's sweet, but she needs help. Make sure you keep an eye on her paperwork." Rachel nodded, glancing at me with a look that was almost pitying. I smiled, holding her hand a little tighter, my heart aching for her innocence. That was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, their true colors emerged. Over the next 2 weeks, the pattern became impossible to ignore. It started with small things. Mark and Linda would exclude me from their conversations, lowering their voices just enough to make it clear I wasn't meant to hear. At brunch, Linda would lean across the table to discuss vacation plans with Rachel, her voice bright and animated, then turned to me with a patronizing smile. "Helen, have you ever thought about joining a retirement community? They have so many activities for people your age. You'd never have to worry about the house again." She said it as if she were offering a gift, but her eyes were cold, already picturing me out of the way. I played along, acting as if the idea had never crossed my mind. "Oh, I suppose that could be nice," I said, letting my voice tremble just a little. "But I do love my garden." Mark patted my hand, his eyes shining with false concern. "Of course, but you shouldn't have to do it all alone. Rachel and I can help you look into options." At a shopping trip, Linda steered me away from the clothes I liked, insisting on picking out age-appropriate outfits. "You want to look dignified, dear, not desperate," she said, holding up a shapeless gray sweater. Mark laughed, adding, "We just want you to feel comfortable." "Helen, maybe it's time to let us handle things for you." Rachel, caught between wanting to please her husband and protect her mother, echoed their concerns. "Maybe you should let Mark look over your will, Mom. He's really good with this stuff." I smiled and nodded, all the while making mental notes. Every slight, every backhanded compliment, every time Linda corrected my pronunciation or Mark offered to help with my finances, I wrote it all down in a little notebook I kept hidden in my purse. I even started recording some of our conversations on my phone, just in case. The community event was the worst. Linda made a show of introducing me as Rachel's mother, who's just getting used to life on her own. She corrected me in front of everyone when I mispronounced a donor's name, then whispered, "Don't worry, Helen. These things can be confusing." Mark hovered nearby, asking pointed questions about my will, my insurance, and whether I'd ever considered setting up a trust. "It's just that things can get complicated as we get older," he said, his tone dripping with concern. Rachel, caught between her husband and her mother, started to echo their worries. "Mom, maybe you should let Mark help with the bills. He's really good with numbers, and Linda knows a lot about estate planning." I could see the doubt in her eyes, the way she looked at me as if I were suddenly fragile, incapable. Linda's corrections became a running theme. At dinner, she would gently move my glass to the proper place or quietly swap my fork for a different one. "It's the little things that matter, Helen," she'd say, her lips pursed in that familiar way. "We want Rachel to feel comfortable in every setting." Mark, meanwhile, would take every opportunity to remind me of his expertise. "Don't worry, Helen. If you ever need help with your affairs, I'll explain the paperwork. It can be confusing at your age." I kept my mask in place, letting them believe I was exactly what they wanted me to be. All the while, I was gathering evidence, building a case, and waiting for the moment when their arrogance would be their undoing. Linda's social circle became another weapon. She would invite Rachel to luncheons and charity events, always making sure I was included but never truly welcomed. At one event, she introduced me to her friends as Rachel's mother, who's still adjusting to life on her own. The women smiled politely, but I could see the pity in their eyes. Mark, meanwhile, would stand off to the side, watching, always ready with a concerned question about my health or my finances. Rachel, eager to fit in, started to pick up their habits. She began asking if I was eating enough, if I needed help with the bills, if I was lonely in the house. She meant well, but I could see the seeds of doubt being planted, watered by Linda's gentle suggestions and Mark's concerned questions. "Maybe it's time to think about the future, Mom," Rachel said one evening. "You've done so much for me. Let us help you now." I hugged her tightly, feeling a pang of sadness, but also a surge of determination. I'd seen this pattern before, people who mistake kindness for weakness, who believe age is the same as ignorance. I let them believe what they wanted, all the while gathering evidence, documenting every slight, every humiliation, every attempt to push me aside. Mark's probing became more direct. He asked about my investments, my will, my insurance policies. "It's just that we want to make sure everything is in order," he said, his tone dripping with false concern. "You never know what could happen." Linda would nod, adding, "It's always best to be prepared, Helen. You never know when you might need a little extra help." I nodded, letting my voice tremble. "You're right, Mark. I suppose I should get my affairs in order." Linda smiled, satisfied, and turned the conversation to the upcoming gala, making sure to mention the exclusive guest list and the importance of keeping up appearances. All the while, I kept my mask in place, letting them believe I was exactly what they wanted me to be. I was no longer just protecting myself, I was protecting Rachel's future, even if she couldn't see it yet. I was gathering evidence, building a case, and waiting for the moment when their arrogance would be their undoing. But what happened next crossed a line. It was a Thursday evening when the mask finally slipped. Rachel had invited me over for dinner, hoping to bridge the growing distance between us. Mark was unusually attentive, pouring my wine and asking about my day, but I could sense the tension beneath his charm. Linda arrived late, breezing in with a box of pastries and a flurry of apologies, her eyes scanning the room as if she were taking inventory. The conversation was stilted, every word weighed and measured, and I felt the undercurrent of something brewing just beneath the surface. After dinner, Rachel excused herself to take a call from work, and Linda offered to help Mark tidy up in his office. I lingered in the hallway, pretending to admire a family photo, my ears tuned to the muffled voices coming from behind the half-closed door. Mark's voice was low, urgent. "We need to get her signature on the trust transfer by the end of the month. If we wait any longer, she might get suspicious. I'll draft the documents tonight. She's too old to understand the difference." Linda's reply was colder, more calculating. "You'll have to forge it if she hesitates. We'll say it's for her own good. Rachel will believe whatever you tell her. She's always been too trusting." There was a pause, then Mark's voice again, laced with arrogance. "She'll never know. By the time she figures it out, it'll all be ours. The house, the accounts, everything." My heart hammered in my chest, but I kept my breathing steady. I'd suspected they were after more than just my goodwill, but hearing it confirmed was something else entirely. I pressed myself against the wall, listening as Linda added, "She's too old to understand what she's signing anyway. We'll make it look official. No one will question it." I waited until they left the room, then slipped in quietly. Mark's office was meticulously organized, every file labeled, every pen in its place. But on the desk, half hidden beneath a stack of papers, was a folder marked Trust Documents. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside, I found a freshly printed will, my name typed neatly at the top, the signature at the bottom a crude imitation of my own. The language was clear. All my assets, including my home and investments, would transfer to Rachel, but with Mark named as sole trustee. In effect, he would control everything. I took photos of the document with my phone, careful to return everything exactly as I'd found it. My mind raced with possibilities. I could end this now, bring the evidence to Rachel, confront Mark and Linda in front of the whole family. But I knew it wouldn't be enough. Rachel's heart was too soft, too trusting. She needed to see their true faces, to witness their greed and arrogance firsthand. As I left the office, I heard Linda's voice drifting from the kitchen. She's too old to understand what's happening. By the time she figures it out, it'll be too late. Her words stung, but they also steeled my resolve. I would let them think they were winning, let them dig their own graves with every forged document and whispered scheme. Mark and Linda grew bolder in the days that followed, their confidence swelling with each small victory. They whispered in corners, made phone calls behind closed doors, and left papers lying around as if I were too blind to notice. I saw everything. I wrote it all down, recorded every conversation I could, and waited for the moment when their arrogance would be their undoing. Inside, I wrestled with my own doubts. Was I doing the right thing by letting this play out? Was I risking too much, letting Rachel get hurt? But I reminded myself, I could end this now. But Rachel needs to see the truth. She needed to learn that not everyone who smiles at you is a friend, and that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who can do the most harm. The next week, Mark tried to casually bring up the idea of me signing some routine paperwork. He smiled, sliding a folder across the table. "It's just a few things to make sure everything's in order, Helen. You know, in case anything ever happens." Linda chimed in, her voice syrupy sweet. "We just want to make sure Rachel is taken care of. It's always best to be prepared." I feigned confusion, flipping through the pages with trembling hands. "I'm not sure I understand all of this," I said, my voice small. Mark patted my hand, his tone patronizing. "Don't worry, I'll explain the paperwork. It can be confusing at your age." I nodded, letting them believe I was exactly what they wanted me to be. That night, I lay awake, replaying their words in my mind. "She'll never know. She's too old to understand." I repeated those phrases to myself, letting them burn into my memory. I could end this now, but Rachel needs to see the truth. She needs to see what they're capable of, or she'll never learn. I would let them think they were winning, let them dig their own graves with every lie and every forged document. I wasn't just gathering evidence anymore. I was building a case that would destroy them completely. The weeks that followed were a test of every ounce of patience and restraint I possessed. Mark and Linda, emboldened by their secret plotting, began to escalate their campaign in ways that would have broken a lesser woman. I reminded myself over and over, for Rachel, I would wait. But there were moments when my resolve nearly cracked. The community gala was the first real public test. It was an annual event, one I'd attended for years, but this time, everything felt different. Linda had insisted on handling the invitations, and when I arrived, I found myself seated at a table far from the stage, surrounded by people I barely knew. Mark and Linda, meanwhile, were front and center, laughing with the event organizers and posing for photos. I tried to blend in, but Linda made sure I couldn't. During the dinner, she stood to make a toast. "We're so grateful for all the support from our community," she began, her voice ringing out across the hall. "And of course we must thank Helen Marshall, who's been with us for so many years. It's not easy adjusting to life on your own at her age, but she's doing her best." The room went quiet, all eyes on me. Linda smiled, her lips pursed in that familiar way, and added, "If anyone knows of a good retirement community, do let us know. We want Helen to be comfortable as she enters this next chapter." A few people chuckled awkwardly. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but I forced a smile and nodded, pretending not to notice the pitying glances. Inside, I was seething. I repeated my mantra. They had no idea. I made a mental note of every face in the room, every witness to Linda's little performance. After the gala, Mark cornered Rachel in the hallway. I watched from a distance as he spoke in low, urgent tones, his hand on her arm. Later that night, Rachel came to me, her expression troubled. "Mom, Mark's worried about you. He thinks you might need some help managing things. Maybe it's time to let someone else handle the bills, the house, all of it. He's really good with this stuff. He's got experience." I looked at my daughter, searching her face for the girl I'd raised. She seemed so earnest, so convinced she was doing the right thing. Maybe it's time for a change, she said softly. You've done so much for me, but you don't have to do it all alone anymore. My heart broke a little in that moment. I wanted to shake her, to make her see the truth, but I kept my voice gentle. I appreciate your concern, Rachel. Maybe you're right. Maybe I do need some help. I let my shoulders slump, let my hands tremble just a bit. Mark, watching from the doorway, smiled in triumph. The next day, Mark presented me with a stack of papers. These are just some forms to make things easier, Helen. Power of attorney, a few bank documents, nothing complicated. I'll walk you through it. He spoke slowly, as if I were a child, and Rachel hovered nearby, nodding encouragement. I took the pen, my hands shaking for effect, and began to sign. But instead of my real signature, I wrote the name of a childhood friend, one I knew would never hold up in court. Mark didn't notice, too busy congratulating himself. See, Rachel? She trusts me. I told you I could handle it. Later, I slipped away to my room, my heart pounding. I recorded everything in my notebook, every word, every detail. I even took photos of the documents before Mark whisked them away. I knew they'd try to use them soon, and when they did, they'd find nothing but a legal dead end. The days blurred together in a haze of small humiliations and subtle betrayals. Linda corrected me in front of guests. Mark dismissed my opinions on everything from investments to recipes, and Rachel grew more distant, caught in the web they'd spun. I watched her struggle, torn between loyalty to her mother and the man she thought she loved. There were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was doing the right thing. Was it fair to let Rachel be hurt, even if it was the only way she'd learn? But every time I considered ending the charade, I remembered the forged will, the whispered plans, the greed in Mark's eyes. I reminded myself, for Rachel I would wait. She needed to see their true nature, to understand what real love and loyalty looked like. I kept gathering evidence, documenting every move, every insult, every attempt to push me aside. I was no longer just protecting myself. I was protecting Rachel's future, even if she couldn't see it yet. The day I'd been waiting for finally arrived. They were ready to make their final move, and I was ready to spring my trap. The day before the legal meeting, the house felt emptier than ever. Rachel barely spoke to me at breakfast, her eyes fixed on her phone, her answers clipped and distracted. I could feel the distance between us, a chasm widened by every whisper Mark had poured into her ear. When she finally looked up, her face was set with a determination I hadn't seen since she was a child. Mom, I think it's time I moved out. Mark and I found a place. It's for the best. You'll be in good hands with him and Linda helping you now. I nodded, swallowing the ache in my chest. I wanted to reach across the table, to remind her of all the nights I'd stayed up with her when she was sick, all the sacrifices I'd made to give her a good life. But I just smiled, letting her believe I was resigned, defeated. If that's what you think is best, Rachel, I said softly. She squeezed my hand, but her eyes were already somewhere else. That afternoon, Mark and Linda arrived, all business and bright smiles. They swept through the house, gathering documents, checking their lists, barely acknowledging me, except to remind me to be ready for the meeting in the morning. I overheard them in the kitchen, their voices low but giddy. She never suspected a thing, Mark said, his laughter sharp and cold. By this time tomorrow it'll all be ours. She's so clueless, it's almost sad. Linda poured herself a glass of wine, clinking it against Mark's. To new beginnings, and to finally getting what we deserve. I told you, all it takes is a little patience and a lot of confidence. She's too old to fight back. They toasted, their voices echoing through the house that had once been filled with warmth and laughter. I watched them from the hallway, unseen, my heart pounding not with fear, but with a cold, steady resolve. They thought they'd won. They thought I was beaten, that I'd simply hand over everything I'd built, everything I'd saved for Rachel's future. They had no idea what was coming. That night, I sat at my desk, surrounded by the evidence I'd gathered, recordings, photographs, copies of forged documents, and a detailed timeline of every scheme and insult. I called my attorney, a woman I'd mentored years ago, and confirmed that everything was in place for the morning. My legal team would be waiting, ready to step in at the right moment. I checked and rechecked every detail, my mind sharp and clear. As I prepared for bed, I allowed myself a moment of sadness for Rachel, for the innocence she was about to lose. But I knew this was the only way. She needed to see the truth with her own eyes, to understand the cost of misplaced trust. I whispered my mantra one last time before sleep. They have no idea what's about to happen. The legal meeting was everything they'd planned, but it would be nothing like they expected. The morning of the legal meeting, the air in the house was thick with anticipation. Mark arrived first, dressed in a crisp suit, his eyes bright with victory. Linda followed, her lips pursed in satisfaction, carrying a folder of documents. Rachel trailed behind, looking tired and uncertain, but determined to see things through. The attorney Mark had hired, a young man with slicked-back hair and a forced smile, sat up at the dining table, shuffling papers and waiting for my signature. Mark slid the final document across the table, his voice syrupy sweet. "Just sign here, Helen. This will make everything so much easier for you. We'll take care of the bills, the house, everything. You can finally relax, maybe even look into that retirement home we talked about." I looked at the pen in my hand, then at the faces around me. For a moment, I let the silence stretch, watching their confidence swell. I could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on me, the certainty that I would simply comply, that I was too old, too tired, too simple to fight back. Then, slowly, I stood. I slipped off my old faded sweater, revealing a crisp, tailored blouse beneath. My voice, when it came, was steady and clear, carrying across the room with a quiet authority none of them had ever heard before. "I won't be signing anything today," I said, meeting Mark's eyes, "because I am Helen Marshall, founder and owner of Marshall Consulting. I built my business from the ground up, and I have no intention of handing it over to anyone, least of all to those who would steal it through lies and forgery." The room fell silent. Mark's face went pale, his mouth opening and closing without a sound. Linda's hand trembled, the folder she was holding slipping from her grasp and scattering papers across the table. Rachel stared at me, shock and confusion warring on her face. At that moment, the doors opened and my legal team entered, 3 sharp-suited professionals, each carrying a briefcase. The attorney Mark had hired looked up, startled, as my lead counsel, Ms. Patel, placed a thick folder in front of me and addressed the room. "We have evidence of attempted fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit theft, all perpetrated by Mark and Linda Evans." I placed my credentials on the table, the company logo gleaming on the cover. "For years I've managed more than just bills. I've protected assets, negotiated contracts, and outsmarted people far more cunning than you. And I've documented every conversation, every forged document, every attempt to push me out of my own life." Mark tried to recover, his voice shaky. "This is absurd. Helen, you're confused. You don't understand what's at stake here." I turned to him, my gaze unwavering. "On the contrary, Mark, I understand perfectly. You offered to explain the paperwork, but you never imagined I was the one who wrote it. And Linda, you suggested a retirement home. Perhaps you should start looking for one yourself." The boardroom was silent, the power dynamic shifting in an instant. For the first time they saw me, not as a frail old woman, but as the force I truly was. Rachel stared at me, her eyes wide with shock as the truth unraveled before her. The attorney Mark had hired looked from me to his client, clearly realizing he was in over his head. Linda's composure cracked. "You can't do this. This is our family's future." I met her gaze, my voice calm but unyielding. "You tried to take what wasn't yours. You underestimated me, just like everyone else. But I've been 10 steps ahead of you from the start," Mark stammered. This can't be right." "You're just," I cut him off with a calm smile. "I am the owner. I am the founder. And I am the woman you've underestimated at every turn." The silence was absolute, the room frozen as the truth settled over them. I could see the realization dawning in their eyes, the understanding that everything they thought they knew had just been turned upside down. But I wasn't done. Not even close. I let the silence linger, letting the weight of my words settle over the room. Then, with a calmness I'd honed over decades, I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a small digital recorder. I pressed play, and the room filled with the unmistakable voices of Mark and Linda. "We need to get her signature on the trust transfer by the end of the month," Mark's voice crackled through the speaker. every word clear. If we wait any longer, she might get suspicious. I'll draft the documents tonight. She's too old to understand the difference. Linda's reply was just as damning. You'll have to forge it if she hesitates. We'll say it's for her own good. Rachel will believe whatever you tell her. She's always been too trusting. A stunned hush fell over the room. Mark's face drained of color, and Linda's bravado vanished, replaced by a look of pure panic. Rachel's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes darting between me and her husband. I paused the recording and looked each of them in the eye. That was just one conversation, I said, my voice steady. There are more. Every meeting, every whispered scheme, every attempt to push me aside, I documented it all. I slid a stack of photographs across the table. These are images of the forged will I found in Mark's office. Note the signature, an obvious imitation of mine. The language is clear. All my assets, including my home and investments, would transfer to Rachel, but with Mark named as sole trustee. In effect, he would control everything. Mark tried to speak, but his voice faltered. This is a misunderstanding. Ms. Patel, my attorney, cut him off. We also have statements from staff and notaries who were approached to witness the transfer. They refused, of course, and reported the attempt to our office. Here are their signed testimonies. She handed copies to the attorney and to the notary, who read in growing disbelief. Linda's composure cracked. You can't prove anything. This is all circumstantial, I turned to her, my eyes unwavering. You corrected me in front of everyone, Linda. You made sure I looked weak, confused, incapable. But I was documenting every word, every humiliation, every attempt to undermine me. And now, so is everyone else in this room. Mark, desperate, tried to regain control. Helen, you're making a mistake. This will ruin everything. I shook my head. No, Mark. You did that the moment you decided to steal from your own family. You offered to explain the paperwork, but you never imagined I was the one who wrote it. You thought I was too old to understand, too simple to fight back. But I've been 10 steps ahead of you from the start. The attorney looked at Mark, his confidence gone. Rachel sat frozen, the truth finally dawning in her eyes. Mark's denial grew weaker. This isn't what it looks like. I was just trying to help. I met his gaze, my voice gentle but unyielding. You were trying to help yourself, Mark, and you almost succeeded. But you underestimated me, just like your mother did. The evidence was overwhelming, each piece a nail in the coffin of their scheme. The Evanses' panic was palpable, their denials growing more desperate with every passing second. I remained calm, professional, and unflinching, the years of experience and strategy finally revealed for all to see. Of course, documentation wasn't my only preparation. The shock in the room was palpable. The notary's eyes darted from the evidence to Mark and Linda, her mouth slightly open. Rachel's friends, who had come to witness what they thought would be a simple family matter, exchanged stunned glances. One of them whispered, "I can't believe they tried to scam her." The words rippled through the group, and suddenly the tide turned. People who had once fawned over Mark and Linda now stepped back, their faces a mix of pity and disgust. Linda, who had always prided herself on her social standing, looked around for support and found none. Mark's carefully curated image shattered in an instant, his expensive watch and designer suit now looking gaudy and desperate rather than impressive. I let the silence linger before I spoke again. You know, Linda, that community gala where you so kindly suggested I look into retirement homes? I own that venue. In fact, I've sponsored it for years. Every invitation you sent out, every event you planned, happened because I allowed it. The realization hit her like a slap, her cheeks flushing with humiliation. The room erupted in whispers, and I saw several people pull out their phones, already typing messages and snapping photos. Social media lit up within minutes. Did you hear what happened at the Evans legal meeting? Turns out Helen Marshall is the real power behind the family. Mark and Linda tried to steal from her. Unbelievable. Invitations that once flowed freely to the Evanses dried up overnight. Their names, once synonymous with influence and respect, became a warning whispered at dinner tables and in private messages. Rachel, her earlier doubts now replaced by a mix of shame and awe, looked at me with new eyes. The power had shifted completely. The people who had tried to make me feel small were suddenly the smallest people in the room. As the meeting ended, people approached me with apologies and respect. Some offered quiet words of support. Others simply nodded, acknowledging the truth they had ignored for so long. The Evanses, once the center of every social circle, found themselves standing alone, the room parting around them like water around a stone. Linda's public insult at the gala, Mark's smug dismissal of my old-fashioned ways, Rachel's hesitant, "Maybe it's time for a change." All of it was reversed in a single stunning afternoon. The status symbols they had clung to so tightly now looked cheap and hollow. My quiet strength, once overlooked, was suddenly the only thing that mattered, but social consequences were just the beginning. The aftermath of the meeting was swift and merciless. As the last of the evidence was presented, the doors to the conference room opened and 2 uniformed police officers entered, their presence sending a fresh wave of shock through the crowd. The officers moved with quiet authority, their eyes fixed on Mark and Linda. The room fell silent as one officer stepped forward. Reading from a prepared statement, "Mark Evans, Linda Evans, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, and attempted theft. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Linda gasped, her composure finally shattering. "This is a mistake. We're respected members of this community," she cried, but the officers were unmoved. Mark tried to protest, but his words were lost in the flurry of activity as the officers placed him in handcuffs. Rachel stood frozen, her face pale, her world unraveling in front of her. My legal team, led by Ms. Patel, stepped forward to address the board and the assembled witnesses. "We have been working with law enforcement for weeks," she explained, her voice steady and professional. "Every document, every recording, every witness statement has been verified. The forged will, the fraudulent power of attorney, the attempts to manipulate Mrs. Marshall's finances. There is no doubt about their intent or their guilt." As the officers led Mark and Linda away, another member of my legal team handed me a list of their frozen assets. "Their accounts are locked, their properties flagged for seizure. Any attempt to transfer funds or sell assets will be blocked by court order." The finality in her voice was unmistakable. Mark's career, once the envy of his peers, was over in an instant. His name was stripped from the firm's letterhead, his license suspended pending trial. Linda's social calendar, once filled with galas and luncheons, was suddenly empty. Their reputations, so carefully cultivated, were destroyed in a single afternoon. The board members, who had once looked to Mark for leadership, now turned to me. Some offered apologies, others simply nodded in respect. The message was clear. The era of the Evanses was over. Rachel, standing off to the side, watched the scene unfold with tears in her eyes. Ms. Patel approached her gently. "Rachel, you are not under investigation. There is no evidence you participated in their crimes. But you will need to answer some questions, and you'll have to live with the choices you made." I watched as the people who had tried to steal my life's work were led out in handcuffs, their futures as empty as the promises they'd made. Justice, at last, was not just a word but a reality. The law, which they had twisted for their own gain, had finally turned against them. As they were led away, I turned to the person who mattered most. As the police led Mark and Linda away, the room buzzed with a new kind of energy, one that was equal parts relief and curiosity. But I wasn't finished. I had promised myself that justice would be thorough, not just for me and Rachel, but for anyone else who had suffered at the hands of people like Mark and Linda. Ms. Patel nodded to the back of the room, and my private investigator, Mr. Harris, stepped forward. He was a quiet man, unassuming in his gray suit, but his eyes were sharp and his file was thick. He cleared his throat and addressed the board, his voice steady and precise. "In the course of our investigation, we uncovered a disturbing pattern. Mark and Linda Evans have orchestrated similar schemes in 3 other towns over the past decade. Each time they targeted widows or elderly homeowners, offering help with bills and paperwork, only to forge documents and siphon away assets." He opened the folder, revealing statements from prior victims, women and men who had lost their homes, their savings, even their sense of security. One letter read, "I trusted Mark when he said he was just here to help. I never imagined he'd take everything from me. Another, shakier hand had written, "Linda made me feel like family," then left me with nothing. The pain in those words was unmistakable, and I felt a surge of vindication knowing their stories would finally be heard. Mr. Harris continued, "We have evidence of forged signatures, fraudulent trusts, and even attempts to manipulate medical records to declare some victims incompetent. In each case, the Evanses used their legal knowledge and social standing to isolate their targets, then moved in for the kill. They were careful, but not careful enough. Several board members gasped, and a few exchanged horrified glances. The room, which had once been a stage for the Evanses' arrogance, was now a court of reckoning. "We've already contacted authorities in those towns," Mr. Harris said. "Some of the victims are here today, ready to testify. Others have sent written statements. The pattern is clear. This was not a one-time lapse in judgment. This was a way of life." I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of those who had doubted me, those who had once believed Mark's earliest dismissals. "She's just a nobody." Now the truth was undeniable. The Evanses' crimes were not just against me, but against a whole community of people who had trusted them, only to be betrayed. One of the prior victims, a woman with silver hair and trembling hands, stood up and spoke. "Thank you, Mrs. Marshall. You did what none of us could. You stopped them." Her voice was soft, but the gratitude in her eyes was fierce. I nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle over me. "No one is a nobody," I said quietly. "Not in my world. Not ever again." The boardroom, once a place of secrets and schemes, was now filled with the light of truth. The Evanses' pattern of villainy was exposed for all to see, and the justice that began with my family would ripple outward, bringing closure and hope to others who had suffered in silence. But there was still one person I needed to address. The boardroom slowly emptied, the echoes of the day's revelations lingering in the air. I stood by the window, watching the last of the police cars pull away, my heart heavy but steady. Rachel lingered near the door, her hands twisting nervously, her eyes red from tears she'd tried to hide. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was thick with everything that had gone unsaid. Finally, Rachel crossed the room, her voice trembling. "Mom, I don't even know where to start. I'm so sorry. I should have listened to you. I should have seen what they were doing, but I didn't want to believe it. I let Mark and Linda turn me against you. I let them make me doubt my own mother." I turned to her, taking her hands in mine. They were cold, shaking with the weight of her regret. "Rachel, you're my daughter. I know your heart. You wanted to believe the best in people, and that's not a weakness. But sometimes, people hide who they really are behind pretty words and smiles. I needed you to see that for yourself. If I'd told you everything from the start, you might never have believed me. Some lessons have to be lived to be learned." She shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I was so blind. I thought I was protecting you, but I was just making it easier for them to hurt you. I don't know how to make it right." I brushed the hair from her forehead, just as I had when she was a little girl. "You make it right by learning from it, by remembering that character matters more than appearance, and that love isn't proven by words, but by actions. You trusted the wrong people, but you're here now. That's what matters." She pulled me into a fierce hug, holding on as if she might never let go. "I promise, Mom, I'll never let anyone come between us again. I'll be more careful. I'll listen. I'll trust you." I held her close, feeling the years of worry and heartache melt away. "We all make mistakes, Rachel. What matters is that we learn and grow. I love you, and nothing will ever change that." She nodded, wiping her eyes, a small, grateful smile breaking through the sadness. "I love you too, Mom. Thank you for protecting me, even when I didn't deserve it." We sat together in the quiet, the bond between us stronger than it had ever been. Rachel's voice was soft, but determined. "I want to do better, Mom. I want to be the kind of person who sees through the surface, who doesn't get fooled by charm or status. I want to be more like you." I smiled, pride swelling in my chest. "You already are, Rachel. You just needed to see it for yourself. The world is full of people who will try to take advantage of your kindness, but that doesn't mean you should stop being kind. It just means you need to be wise too." She nodded, her eyes shining with new understanding. "I will, I promise." We sat in silence for a while, watching the sun set over the city. The storm had passed, and in its wake, we found forgiveness, understanding, and a new beginning. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but I also knew we would face them together, stronger and wiser than before. In the aftermath, justice continued to unfold. 6 months passed, and the dust finally settled. Mark and Linda were both convicted on multiple counts of fraud and forgery. The judge, unmoved by their tears or excuses, handed down sentences that would keep them behind bars for years. Their assets, what little remained after the courts finished, were seized and liquidated, the proceeds distributed among their victims. Their names became a warning whispered at dinner tables and in church pews, a lesson in greed and arrogance that no one in town would soon forget. Mark, once so eager to please and so easily trusted, changed in ways I hadn't dared hope. He spent his days in a modest cell, his appeals denied, his reputation in tatters. Linda, who had once ruled the social calendar, found herself shunned by the very women who had once vied for her approval. She wrote letters from prison, but few were answered. Their social circle, once so carefully cultivated, evaporated overnight. The Evans name, once a symbol of status, was now synonymous with betrayal. Rachel, too, changed in ways I hadn't dared hope. She threw herself into her work, taking on new responsibilities and earning the respect of her colleagues. She started volunteering at the very charity where Linda had once tried to humiliate me, determined to give back and rebuild her sense of purpose. She apologized to those she'd hurt with her blind trust, and over time, people forgave her. I watched her grow into a woman who valued character over charm, substance over surface. As for me, life returned to a quieter, steadier rhythm. My business, which I'd quietly resumed consulting for, flourished as word spread of my ordeal and my resolve. Neighbors who once pitied me now greeted me with respect, and friends who had kept their distance returned with warmth and admiration. The story of what happened became something of a local legend. How the helpless widow outsmarted 2 seasoned con artists and protected not just her own family, but others as well. Other victims of Mark and Linda's schemes received compensation, and some even found the courage to start over. The community, once divided by gossip and suspicion, came together in support and solidarity. I found myself invited to speak at gatherings, to share what I'd learned about patience, vigilance, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing your own worth. Looking back now, I realize how close I came to losing everything that truly mattered. Not just my home or my savings, but the trust and love of my only daughter. If this ordeal taught me anything, it's that patience and preparation are not weaknesses. They are the quiet strengths that carry us through life's hardest storms. I learned to trust my instincts, even when others tried to make me doubt myself. Every uneasy feeling, every small red flag was a warning I was wise to heed. I want anyone listening to remember, never let someone else define your worth. People will try to put you in a box, to tell you you're too old, too soft, too naive. But your experience, your wisdom, and your love are powerful beyond measure. Document everything, protect yourself, and don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it. But above all, believe in your own strength even when others don't. Character always reveals itself in the end. The world may value appearances, but it's what's inside that endures. I watched my daughter learn that lesson the hard way, and I hope you never have to. But if you do, know that you are not alone, and you are stronger than you think. Now, when I sit with Rachel in the garden, laughter and trust restored between us, I feel a peace I haven't known in years. We are both wiser, both changed, and both grateful for a second chance. They thought I was nobody. I showed them that nobody beats a mother protecting her family.